All right. Okay.
There you go. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to do both just in case anything gets lost in translation. Okay. So I'm just going to start up asking you, how familiar are you with the new integration of artificial intelligence in like the art process, sorry.
Well, I'm aware of it. I'm aware of the that some uh works of art have been generated to look like combinations of other artists or a single artist or and in literature the same thing, generating something, and there's always like a little bit of strangeness to them, so they don't quite look like the artists that they're or the writers that they're depicting. And there was something I saw. I'm somewhat aware of it, not like not no expert, of course, because my area is not digital. I use digital equipment just like this. I mean, this you can say is a form of artificial intelligence to some extent. I mean, it's helping to generate those kinds of things. If you could access every um, video that's been streamed or whatever, it could assimilate that ultimately, and that's where it's headed. It's complete assimilation of all electronically generated information, no matter what it is, which comes down to the simple zeros and ones, right? And whatever machine is processing those zeros and ones. Um, so I'm not like an expert on computers or
Mhm.
anything like that, or even digital art, but yeah, I am familiar with it. What was your question again? Sorry.
No,
I
you're
tend,
okay.
I tend to digress a lot. So
I just wanted to get a feel of like how familiar you are with it. So it seems like you do know some like
enough where I have some view
opinion.
of it and probably experience with it, because all of these what do they call them? They call them uh root. What do they call it when I'm going blank on the word, but anyway, where they pick they read everything that you do on the computer, and then they give you stuff that's related to your
Like the
your
algorithm?
yeah, the algorithm. That's the word I was looking for. And I had a little bit of upper math, but I couldn't even remember what an algorithm is, and I don't think that most people would know what an algorithm is either. But they understand what it's doing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's taking their information and spitting it back at them with things that um yeah.
So as you know, like um the artificial intelligence has like the power to kind of recreate and feed off of previous artworks, like previous already finished artwork.
Right.
Do you believe that artificial intelligence artworks have the power to take over art and design jobs in the future?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, human beings have already started doing that, so yeah, but it doesn't replace human beings. It just makes the world stranger. It's already strange to begin with. Everything. If you're looking at certain insects, they're the weirdest things you can imagine. And then people riff on that. But it's I had some things I was gonna say at some point, and I just say them real quick.
Mhm.
Like take the idea of the avatar. It's a Hindu word, right? And we use it in computers all the time. It's a so in the Hindu, it's a god or a deity or a spirit being that manifests physically. And the way we use avatar when in relation to computers, it's a visual manifestation, a metaphysical manifestation of our physical being, right? It may not look like us, but it's a visual manifestation of our personal consciousness or personal wishes or whatever. So, when we put it onto a into generated into a computer, some, so in a way you're turning it on its head. So it has something to do with the manifestation of consciousness, right? AI. So this manifestation of consciousness is an externalization of human consciousness, but that doesn't preclude the possibility that it also generates a new form of consciousness. So we are a form of consciousness that is come through evolution, which which I have a slightly different view of evolution than maybe your normal Darwinian or scientific idea of evolution, because I believe that it incorporates consciousness from the original consciousness, so that we're a manifestation of consciousness. In some ways, we are the avatars of higher consciousness to begin with. We've been created, and that consciousness comes into us. And evolution is actually working in two directions, so that we're evolving towards that higher consciousness, but we've also come from that higher consciousness. So this often would cause problems in a scientific community, and also in many spiritual communities, like certain fundamentalists, because it's too complex of an idea. Not that I have to simplify things, because in some ways I have my mind is limited, but I tend to assimilate things, but they're not necessarily the details. But I've assimilated the concepts, and I shrink them down to where I can express them in certain simplified ways. But anyway, so this idea of the avatar, and someone that's dealt with that in cinema is Steven Spielberg's AI, and also originally that film. Do you know that film, AI?
I haven't seen it myself, no.
Okay, well, you probably shouldn't talk about it then. But anyway, he has this this evolution of towards robotic conscious entities, and there's a child that's built to be a companion to another child, and that child somehow ultimately gets trapped for eons after some kind of disaster. And then you see at the very end these alien type beings that are sort of resemble human beings, but your typical alien, big headed, small body beings. And they rescue this AI creature that's been there for thousands of years or whatever, and it makes you question whether or not the whole thing is a simulation, or whether and that consciousness is a simulation, digital simulation, and they create a realm in which this creature can live out a fantasy heaven, right, where his mother that he's become attached to lives. And there's some issues in AI. Like, on the one hand, they want it to be able to do rational computation, right? Rational, assimilate things rationally, and then rationally generate the answers to rational questions. But there's also this thing, especially in robotics, where they also want it to reflect human emotion. You still there? I can't see you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I think it's my internet's a little glitchy, but I can hear everything.
Okay, so they also want it to simulate human emotion or feelings. So you have thought and feeling, and both of those things are associated with the human being, and also the will to create. So we have thought, will, and feeling, and at some point, do these beings actually feel, actually think, and actually have will to recreate or create? And so that becomes the questions for me. In is it random? Does it create the speculative realm of meaninglessness? So is an AI generated image meaningless because it's generated from something that actually lacks humanity? Or is it something that can ultimately assimilate humanity, both the thinking side of humanity, the feeling side of humanity, and the actual will to make. And this is a complex thing. And first you have to understand what a human being is. What is a human being? Because these on the one hand, these machines, which they can still be considered a machine because they're based in mechanistic um, processes, which are basically a reflection of mineral existence. Because the idea of mechanism works most closely in the mineral realm, although there are possibly other things going on in the mineral realm besides mechanism. But cause and effect, you can see in the mineral realm. It becomes more complex when you start talking about plants, animals, and humans. So when you have, I got to get back to what I was saying because I just lost my train of thought. So, is it actually thinking? Is it actually feeling? Is it actually doing things out of a will, like our human will? Right? Does that make sense? And then at a certain point, does it have ego consciousness? So that's where the human beings are. Animals don't quite have human ego consciousness. They have consciousness, but they don't have ego consciousness. There may be on the path to ego consciousness, like some of the apes resemble human beings quite a lot. But if you have this development of humanity where we're becoming self-aware and more self-aware, we also reflect a type of consciousness that is spread out around us. So we assimilate more and more and more of that which we encounter in nature. And nature pretty much incorporates everything that we see, right? The manifestation of consciousness is nature. So anyway, so understanding what a human being is, and then you start getting into the idea of soul and spirit, which some people think we're just mechanisms, which I understand, but I think that it's more complicated than that. We don't have words for some of the things yet that human beings are, that anything is basically. But there is, if you look at the traditions, the long traditions of esoteric knowledge, which is spiritual knowledge. There's this in the church. There became this split. Actually, science arose out of spiritual seeking knowledge out of spiritual organizations, right? Like the cathedrals of Europe, were basically universities as much as anything else, as much as places of worship. They were also universities. And you go back to Islamic culture, they developed science. The Greeks developed science, but all of these were spiritual cultures. And then that's where science has evolved from. So if you have this history of this spiritual striving towards knowledge, then it also includes this type of leap into another type of unmeasurable consciousness, that's something that cannot be measured, which is the antithesis of what most people think of as scientific knowledge, unless you get into some complex astrophysics or physics. What is it called? It's a type of, what's that branch of physics that deals with things that are inexplicable, that can't be measured. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, off the top of my head, I go blank on things a lot.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I can't remember it either.
Right. Anyway, that's probably enough said. I'll get back to it. But the spiritual plays into the physical, and then going back to that idea of the avatar. And so that ultimately these are spiritual questions. And what is actually in a machine? And go back to the simplest machines. You're taking physical matter. You're taking something that already exists, already has some form of consciousness in it, but not necessarily the elaborate consciousness in human beings. You're taking physical matter, and that's the same thing with robots, with AI. You're taking physical matter and you're manifesting something in it, but it already has something manifested in it. So you're kind of displacing the original consciousness in it, the mineral consciousness, and you're putting human consciousness in it. But you're also, if you're not in control, if ultimately the machine becomes in control, then something else has entered into it. Something that humans can't control has entered into it. And that remains a question to some extent. And that also begs the question, is there something that exists outside of the physical? Are there beings that exist outside of the physical? Do we exist outside of the physical? And one of the simplest tests for this, that is it has to be considered at the human realm a subjective thing, is self-awareness. Like, if I can say I, what does that mean? And do I exist because of the very awareness of myself? You understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to get too far out there with that.
No, you're good.
I don't know my audience.
Actually, going back to the AI thing,
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's just to give
yeah,
you my
it's
background
actually all,
and thoughts on
yes, of
this.
course. It's actually all like together, because you were saying that, maybe AI isn't considered like a real consciousness because it doesn't have its own thoughts or feelings. But suppose like people in the field say that because AI advances so quickly and it like feeds off its own system or like data in order to keep
Yeah,
advancing,
right.
um, supposedly in the future, maybe they won't be like genuine according to us humans, but it will start to believe that it does have its own thoughts and its own feelings.
Well,
And
that's possible. Self-awareness is possible. They may already be aware. It's just that they can't manifest that awareness yet.
Mhm.
Sort of like most human beings are only partially aware. They still have a strong animal nature in them. So they are not quite conscious beings,
So
not
this
aware.
this thought that they might at one point have self-awareness is what worries us humans so much about, will they be able to replace us in some way because they will be able to do the same things that we can in terms of like the self-awareness and being able to come up with original thoughts or ideas, if that makes sense.
Yes.
um, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you the next question, which is involving that kind of like being replaced sort of theme. Do you think there's still a point in pursuing a degree in art or design, even with artificial intelligence being in the picture and it advancing so quickly?
That human beings would be replaced in the design realm.
Yeah.
Well, we can still use machines. I think ultimately we become we're creative beings, but ultimately if we don't realize that we need to seek self-development as well at the same rate that we seek uh the development external to us, like developing civilizations, developing ultimately these AI beings that may supersede us, that there has to be also a comparable inner development. And if that's done, then we can avoid being controlled by these beings that we've created, that also manifest, from my perspective, manifest other beings, their bodies in which other things can manifest. And they might be good, they might not be good. You know, if you can, if you still have the idea that there's a difference between good and evil, that's one of the base questions there. Can these things become good or evil in respect to, I mean, you know, I get really hung up on, say, killing bugs, like killing a roach or killing an ant. My wife hates ants and roaches, and I just don't feel like taking them outside and letting them go all the time. So yeah, it's like I kill them. But is that the way we're gonna be? We're gonna be the little cockroaches and the little you know, the little ants that are in the way of the AI, you know. Um, it's possible that that kind of thing can happen, but if you develop your consciousness at the same rate that you develop the ability to influence physically your surroundings, then, and that's the other thing, we could get trapped in machines, just like the whole Matrix concept. That's a possible reality, but that's not ultimate reality. Ultimate reality is more complicated than that. Well, maybe it's more complicated than that. And it actually brings you back to these things that have been talked about in ancient times in what most people call Gnosticism. There's a Gnostic myth where an evil being creates is the counterpart to this. Ahriman is the counterpart to Ahura Mazda, which is the eternal light being, and he steals light from this being, and he creates the earth realm, which may also include more than the earth. It's just the realm in which we exist now. So, and then Ahura Mazda enters back into that realm to try and free the light from that, you know, and it's a useful myth, right? What we think of as myth, and what I mean by myth, myth is not something that's not true. It's something that it's a story that teaches us something, um, and it may incorporate other beings besides human beings. But anyway, so they have moral moral outcomes in the myths. So this idea of releasing the light from it, so everything comes from light, even that which ultimately generates what we normally think of as evil, is comes originally from the light. But in human beings, we're given free choice. At a certain point, do these autonomous beings have free choice? You know, we have free choice, but obviously we're limited. So we have free choice within the confines of where we find ourselves, and we can liberate ourselves from that and enter even a broader realm of free choice. But it requires us to make certain choices to begin with. I don't know if I answered your question through that. I'm just riffing.
No, yeah, that's great. Okay, so design softwares like Photoshop are now
I'm
incorporated.
familiar with them. I've used them possibly in the past. It's been so long, I don't remember. And they're probably advanced some since then. When I was in grad school, I think I tried to use them. I got to the point where I was just like, you know, making flyers and things like that for art exhibits and stuff. It was easier for me to do it in Word or something like that.
Yeah.
So I just simplified it because my life gets more and more complex. I edited film, video for a while for my art, and that's just made my head hurt. So I'm more hands-on, physical in my art making. So I'm much more comfortable in that.
Uh-huh.
It's just personal thing, but I am familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's actually the program is starting to incorporate AI tools,
Hmm.
which you can use to alter images in any way you can imagine. Um,
Right.
you can make it to like fix mistakes, add different objects to an image,
So all
and
you have to do is give a voice command, right?
or like a text command.
Text command, or okay.
Yeah, add or remove
Ultimately,
this
it'll
word.
be a voice command.
Yeah, add a ring to the finger, change the color of hair, anything like that. Um,
Right.
so do you believe this could be beneficial or detrimental to the future of art and design?
Well, both. I mean, I've got students that I say for my last assignment in the design. I teach 2D design. My main area is ceramics,
Mhm.
um, but I teach 2D design, and I say for the final assignment, I allow people to use whatever materials they want, and if they're digital artists, to use digital because a lot of times they struggle with hand making, but it gives them that awareness of where the programs that they're using come from. You know what I'm saying? And they become better designers by just thinking about the basic ideas behind design. Um, but your question, what to say your question again, please?
Do you think that these tools can be helpful or kind of in the future detrimental to like the creative process of like the art and design?
Both, it depends on the person.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Uh, the first digital films were really awkward and ugly. Um, and they evolved, but then they become to some extent too much of an illusion so that the fantasy world, any kind of human fantasy, begins to be projected into these digital programs and digital imagery. And so here it just comes back down to morality.
Hmm.
You know, you have to make choices. And human beings that interface with machines have to have an ethical perspective. Otherwise, they will become um, manifestations of destructive forces or enslavement or fantasy. Fantasy is not necessarily a good thing. Fantasy can lead us into all kinds of realms and entrapments. It's the same morality that you have to deal with as a human being anyway. If you take away all the machines, you still have these choices. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So there has to be ethical standards, you know, and and you know it. I mean, we're dealing with things that are already horrific, like uh, drone strikes and that kind of thing. I think they became uh, common during the Obama administration, and for whatever good Obama did, you know, I'm not going to get too much into politics, but he did instigate the use of drone strikes in the name of more precise
Mhm.
kills and less collateral damage. But at a certain point, that will obviously and has been used for nefarious intentions, right? To destroy, and that's the whole my worldview is complicated. I mean, I was raised as a Methodist, but I couldn't see the full answers in that, and ultimately, I mean, I've thought about these things a lot, and you know, so you get back to these things, and it becomes moral choices. But these things exist for a reason. The horror that exists in this realm, in contrast to the good that exists in this realm, are purposeful. They pit us against both of those uh, things in order, like it's like a hammer against a forge, and we are molded by them. And out of that, we become destroyed, but we also become reborn as something new. The old metal becomes turned into an object that is useful. We're melted down in the forge, and then we're reformed into something useful. And that, I believe, is what if there's a purpose in life, in one sense, that's the purpose in life, is to form us so that we become conscious beings that have become co-creators at a higher level, not at the physical level, but at a higher level. And that's my worldview, basically in a nutshell. And it's difficult to express, and I get into a lot of trouble with it, just inwardly and personally, because I'm a human being. I'm flawed, and so I fight against the normal things that human beings fight against inwardly, if they do. Now you can give in to it, and you can still, continue on. You can give into your lower nature. You can give into any number of things, any number of appetites, or well, this is something I was thinking about AI before we had this, and that is there's a certain coldness to machines. They only take on, well, like I was thinking about this movie, and you may not know it. It's from my childhood. It's called, and I liked it because when I was a kid, it was interesting to me. It's called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Have you ever heard of that? It's a Walt Disney movie. It's about this car that has all these magical mechanical things. But see, the family that owns this car, and it can fly, it can do all kinds of stuff, and seems to think for itself. But it's a benevolent machine, right? So, and it's before AI, so it's all kind of physical, visual effects. But we do this with all kinds of things. We name our cars. We give it kind of benevolent, anthropomorphic qualities. And who's to say, and like a child with a stuffed toy, who's to say that that stuffed toy doesn't actually have some reflection of that consciousness of the child, what they put into it and what the maker of that toy put into it. And the other can be said as well, that both benevolent and also destructive or harmful consciousness imbued into objects. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
That can be literal, with real destructive machines, but it can also be what most people would think of as metaphorical, but something beyond metaphor.
So what you believe is that it's mostly about the user of a program and not the program itself.
To some extent, but when the program ultimately becomes separated from the user, and there's a thing too. You're talking about the maker and the user. Most people are just users of AI. The makers of AI also have, from my perspective, have responsibility.
Yeah.
So the original makers of AI have as much responsibility as the user. And so you're talking about two different things. The maker and the user might be the same thing, but usually these things are made to make money. Like ultimately people are going to invest in them, and this type of thing is driven by commerce. So commerce itself can be a good thing, but it also the same thing. It's a moral thing. It's like you have to have some morality when otherwise I mean, you can see what's happened. Because of pushing oil for 100 or more years, we've created an imbalance in nature.
Yeah. Actually, it was like the creator of AI, and this is a quote I'm reading right now. He said he regretted all the work he did in the field of artificial intelligence. He said, "I console myself with the normal excuse: if I hadn't done it, someone else would have."
Yeah. Same thing with the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie, but Oppenheimer had the same regrets. He became a peace activist.
Yeah.
And we don't have a strong enough peace activist movement now, but it's the same thing. I mean, the atomic bomb, in a sense, is AI. It's a form of intelligence. It's
Yeah.
artificial. It's human made. And that's the thing. Is this nature, or is it us? Are the things that we make an extension of nature? We're working with nature. You can't make something like that without using material. you know. So it's poison. I was looking at a video this morning about water, and water has what is considered memory in it. Clay has memory as well, in a sense, and it also interacts with water. But what was my point? Um, so they put a vial of a poison in there that was completely sealed up. There was no way that it could interact with the water, but somebody accidentally dropped it into a vial in a lab, and that water was then consequently fed to rats. And even though they measured it and it didn't have the poison in it, it actually killed the rats because something out of that vial, um, this is kind of reverse homeopathy. You know anything about homeopathy? So
No.
it's a type of medicine that only uses minute amounts of of substances in dissolution, to heal. So
Mhm.
even lead, which is poisonous in large amounts, can be introduced into these homeopathic forms and be used as a, a lot of medical science that refutes it. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to really know what you're doing to create substances that would be healing. So the kind of things you might get over the counter might not work anyway. So they also have been subjected to uh, transformations. Can make you feel paranoid as hell when you think about that that what water interacts with, um, is kept in the water. I don't know if what was your question again? Like I said, I went off on a digression.
It's very interesting, like the topics you're talking about. Um, it was just like, well, you did already answer the question, like, do you believe it can be beneficial or detrimental? You think it's
Yeah,
all about the ethics of the user within the program.
the user and the maker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that sometimes because we are flawed beings and we are not fully conscious, we sometimes don't know what we're fooling with. We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We do need to seek like help. It's like from higher consciousness or something. We need to seek to purify ourselves in such a way that we are. This was something from Rudolf Steiner. He said that in the future, and this is already coming to pass, I mean, in its beginnings, in the futures, in order to use a machine, the person will only be able to use certain machines if they have, but benevolent, uh, benevolence. Certain machines will not be able to be used, and you can just something as simple as like, it's kind of a reflection of this, is like when people are alcoholics, they're made to use these keypads to get into their car, and
Hmm.
if they're drunk they can't get into it. Well, maybe not quite that much, but something that'll evolve in the future. We don't know where the next source of energy might come from too. It's like, I read somewhere that crystals, if we could tap their energy, like for electricity or whatever, we'd be able to heat our homes with it, whatever, cool our homes, run our machines or whatever. So, but it has to do with subtle energies as opposed to the radiation from the sun is not quite a subtle energy, but there are subtle energies within the radiation from the sun. So in the future, we may have completely different types of energy. Um, we're probably not going to go backwards, except in our own personage. We possibly could. We could destroy ourselves back to the Stone Age, possibly, but we're not Stone Age beings anymore. We have developed something that's different from the consciousness of the early humans.
So referring to the machines, did you mean that the best option in order to stop um any negative like future from happening would be like regulation of the machine in terms of like the alcoholic
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you have to be able, and it may come down to some type of, I mean, oddly enough, and this might sound really weird, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around this, but some type of ritual, some type of drawing down the right type of energy or spirit. Does that make sense?
yeah.
I don't know if it makes sense. It's not quite. There's a like a there's a there's a point at which it's not so much of a leap as an osmotic movement from physical processes to inexplicable, non-measurable processes. Does that make any sense? I don't know how quite to explain it, and I don't know how to control it in my own life because there's so much involved in human relationships that I'm not good at. I try.
Yeah. I think that would be like it's something that is like past the physical stuff
Yeah.
that I don't think we are um that advanced at that kind of stuff yet, but maybe in the future.
We're not there yet because the people making these machines have, to some extent, not necessarily everyone, but to some extent, have relinquished that belief in something outside of ourselves, and outside of nature. But it interacts with nature, so it's not a metaphysics. It's not just outside,
Mhm.
right? That's what comes back to that idea of the avatar. It's not just outside of creation. It also enters in and is active within creation. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's not just a metaphysics. This idea that, in metaphysics, the idea is actually external to the thing itself. So the idea of the thing is external to the thing. But this is where it interacts with it, and it's transformative. So, and that's the nature of this realm as well. Time, space, movement, um, generate specific constructs in which we are developed. Um, and a lot of the meditative practices are to get back to the center, get back to motionlessness, get back to timelessness. Being in the moment is also being in timelessness, being completely in the moment. There's neither future nor past, but it's all in the present. So that's physical, philosophical, and it's also spiritual, but it applies also to physics, to other things. It's like, what is time? What is motion? What is space? You know, and Einstein was, referred to matter and energy as the two, archetypal um, elements of reality. Um, and maybe that is true, but there might be. But what is matter and what is energy? You know, and does that exclude space? Is space not something that is neither one of those? You know, empty space, is that also an entity, or is it a non-entity? I'm no Einstein. I just, think about these things.
Mhm. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask you the next question. So, are created by artificial intelligence generators use pre-existing artworks, meaning that independent artists' work is being used in a way to generate these new designs without really asking for their permission or crediting them or any financial compensation? Because
Yeah, that's that's already a mark of postmodernism. Oh, go ahead and finish your question. I'm sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead. It's not,
It's just
yeah, go ahead.
because of this artificial intelligence cannot be copyrighted in the US, do you believe that AI generated art should be able to be protected under copyright law?
Oh, you mean the actual generated art, not the artist that it is generated from, but the generated art.
Yes.
It's going to become like really difficult in the future to do that. It's like there's going to be there are already too many images. You get into this complex areas of ownership, and that's already been blown up by postmodern art. Postmodern art is appropriation. There's this, a lot of issues come up when you're talking about appropriation. A whole lot of issues. There was one artist that actually just photographed other photographs that were from famous photographers and had a whole exhibition of those photographs of the photographs. Does that make sense? I mean, you following what I'm saying? Okay, so that's a mark of postmodernism. This is our idea of appropriation. In art, it's especially one of the definitions that follows art. In politics, uh, in in linguistics, it might be slightly different. But in architecture, there's really good examples of this as a mark of postmodernism, where now it's all right, since through modernism it was the idea of the deconstruction of everything to bring it to its essential uh, meanings. I mean, components, elements like line, shape, color, and that kind of thing. And but at the point, and the final thing of that is conceptual art, and before that, uh, the physical manifestation would be, to some extent, because it always has the artist, even if it's an artist that's only working off of the concept, is minimalist art. So once you get past that, and you have Jasper Johns and some other artists, even though it was being done in the early 20th century as well. Um, Postmodernism is the idea that we can go back in time and use it and mine the past, and that it's all right to make visually interesting art, right? And so when you start appropriating from the past, creating a building that has elements, and if you're on the Brownsville campus
I'm
or the
actually at the Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, okay, well, the Brownsville campus is got a lot of like Spanish kind of elements in it, but it's basically modern, and it's postmodern because it's taking from the past. And the Spanish elements also have Islamic elements in them because of Spain's 500 years of rule by the Moors, who were Islamic. And then it also has modernism, like straight up international style mixed in there. And it has Romanesque architecture mixed in there. So it has a lot of different elements mixed together in it, our architecture on this campus. That's postmodernism. And you could say that, and obviously there's an architect behind each one of those buildings. And that's your question, gets back to your question. It's like, who has authorship of something when you start appropriating from the past?
Yeah,
Uh,
'cause at this point, I feel like people are very desperate for like new original content, but it's not really possible to make something original at this point because you think about it, everything has been already done. So any artwork is like a culmination of stuff that's already been created before.
but they've been saying that since the 60s. You know that, right? And
Yeah, I guess it
that's
just depends on the interpretation of like the artist.
like
Maybe adding
70
stuff.
years ago, right? Isn't
Yeah.
it? It's about 70 years ago. So yeah, the interpretation of the artist Yeah, you can license certain things. I imagine if it's a printed out work, that's where I can't really wrap my head around NFTs. But that's kind of in that realm of the NFT. Um,
Yeah, they are AI generated
yeah,
artworks.
but I could put in the same questions and if I created the same work on my own, it's like saying who really came up with the theory of evolution. Um, because there were about 3 or 4 people that came up with the same ideas at the same time, but the one that comes down to history with us is Darwin, right? He was the most successful in disseminating the idea, but there were several that came up with similar. Even Goethe, who was the century before, came up with concepts of evolution. So a lot of times these if it's AI and it can be generated through AI, then it's possible that the image could be generated by another person without even having reference to that original image. But if it's done simultaneously, then you wouldn't know who the author was actually, unless one was like the first one to post it or whatever. But if it were done after the fact, then it might actually incorporate the AI that already been generated. So there that becomes even more complex. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But if I have a twin out there that looks and acts exactly like me, but they were born in another country, maybe spoken over the right language, but maybe spoke English as well, or even were my neighbor for years, but I didn't know it. But they had similar genetic makeup or whatever. Then we're still a different person, right?
Yeah.
Or even if we're biological twins, we were born from the same mother. You know, they're still two different entities. So there the question becomes really complicated. And I also was thinking about GMOs. You know what those are, right?
Yeah.
Genetically modified organisms.
Hmm.
Well, in agriculture, they're not very ethical. They destroy small farmers. They get into litigations with small farmers but you cannot get away from using GMOs if your field, which has organic uh, corn seeds, are planted, and then you're collecting those seeds from the next harvest, and they're next to a field full of GMO corn, then they're going to mix, you know, and you can destroy a small farmer by suing them for using your seed. That's not ethical to me. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where the issue becomes really weird. If it's a big company, um, like there's a lot of issues with big companies and their icons, like say Mickey Mouse, for instance. There's a certain point, there are laws that protect the artist in using and appropriating imagery. And but you can get away with using it, for one thing, if they don't become aware of it. If it's not mass generated and a lot of people see it, if it's only seen in a gallery in one place and no person from Disney sees it, then you're probably fine. If you're using it not as the Disney character, but as a statement. So like there's this outsider artist. Can't remember his name. I go blank on his name sometimes. But he never went to high school. He's an Alabama black man, and he made art obsessively. And he took a, a a Mickey Mouse stuffed animal and he puts it in chains, right? And it's kind of a representation of this little mouse creature, like the black man in the South. And it shows all the pain and suffering of the black man through this little mouse from Walt Disney World. And maybe he didn't think it through like this, but he probably did at some level. Um, but Mickey Mouse is sort of an extension of blackface. The idea of the little uh, the black man amusing others, um, and also then white people appropriating the minstrel show from black minstrels, which were entertainers, and then so really Mickey Mouse originally was an appropriation of something else. And so if they decide to, you could make the argument, if they decide to come after somebody for appropriating Mickey Mouse, then do they really have a leg to stand on? Because they've already appropriated from the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's mainly your opening. The question is unanswered. There's too many questions involved in it.
Yeah.
Everything that human beings do has some element of appropriation in it.
Mhm. There was actually this court case I found very interesting. It deals with like the new AI and being involved in the art world. There was this collection of artists, and they were suing this company who owns an AI generator for art because their art was being used in their database, and they weren't necessarily recreating the artworks, but basically, let's say you can put city or maybe like UTRGV in Van Gogh style, and it'll recreate obviously like an artwork of a picture of UTRGV, but in Van Gogh's painting style. So Van Gogh's style isn't necessarily able to be copyrighted. So that was like the whole ordeal of the case, that because um, the AI generator was only recreating their style and not their actual artworks, or actually taking full resemblance of their artworks, it wasn't able to. They weren't able to succeed at the case because it didn't stand in court.
Well, the original photograph that they put into their system of the art of that artist could be, they could have, the art, he might not have had as good a lawyer. That's probably it. So the lawyer could have argued the other way as well. That original art piece that was in there was stolen. That, or it was copyright. If it was copyrighted, and as soon as you post something, I think it's copyrights it. If you can prove it, that I think posting an image. I mean, I've had this kind of thing happen to me, but I'm not a litigious person. I'm like, somebody took one of my images and they were like a small time. Now, if it had been a big company, I'd want them to pay me. But, this small time rap artist took one of my images and put it on their CD cover or on their website, but they cropped it. So it only used part of the image, but it's definitely my image because I've never seen it anywhere else. I didn't steal it from somebody. It was a personally generated image. So I've had a little bit of experience with that, but on a small scale. But I'm not litigious, so I didn't go after them. But if it's a big company and they make your image famous, well, there's different ways to look at that. You could say you could use it to market yourself, or you could get an agreeable agreement, like a mutually beneficial agreement with that person. But if you have a real stand against this idea of AI generated, you may stand on principle of fighting it. I, I don't have the answers to that. It's just like, it's more and more complicated, but I do think that if an artist is making a living off of their art or wants to make a living off of their art, and somebody infringes upon that, the ability of them to make a living from their art by stealing their art, then, and getting all the credit for it, and they make tons of money off of it, and they don't give the artist anything, then that is a problem, you know. But I also have a different view of commerce in a way. It's like we should start thinking about things differently. Art should be there for everyone, you know, not just the wealthy and not just those that can afford it. And obviously, art is in the computer. You can see art all you want, but to actually have the physical object of a handmade piece of work, it's a different thing than having a computer generated image. You know, it has a life of its own, and it affects the environment in which you know, you're living. I mean, I'm living in clutter right now, and you look at my office, right? But I have a lot of my art. But all of these things, I don't like to have things that are hideous around me because they affect my consciousness. So I have a couple of icons in here. And if I look at them briefly, then you know, I think one thing. Um, and if I had something that was like a monster, you know, glaring at me that was dripping blood or whatever, that's going to affect the way I feel. So, um, so the physical object is different than a computer generated image, and the actual painting or drawing or whatever, that that's a different thing. Um, but getting back to the economic aspect of it, where litigation comes in, um, and also the rights to an image or an object or whatever, you know, that's also done with patents, you know, patented ideas. Somebody may come up with a similar or same idea, um, but if they didn't steal it, do they still have the rights to the patent on it? If they came up with the idea themselves. But um, you can also think of it as you know, art is in a different way. There's socialist ideas of art where like there's a whole socialist potters movement in I think Minnesota was where it was, where you make objects that are affordable for anybody to use every day so that people have beautiful things around them as opposed to manufactured objects. Not all manufactured objects are ugly because they have design in them. They've been designed by somebody who had a view to aesthetics. Um, so, um, but there's a group of people in Hudson that have what's called art dispersal, and maybe we need to think differently about the economy and about art in general, about culture. Culture should be accessible to everyone. You know, cultural enhancement should be accessible to everyone. Um, but the artist has to have a way to live. So people also have to support the arts, but it's not necessarily you buy my art and then you have the art. That's not the only model. Obviously, people give away art all the time on the internet because we can look at it. I can download images whether they're copyrighted or not for my personal use. I just can't. I just can't uh, benefit financially from them if they're copyrighted. So, um, or disseminate them widely if they're copyrighted. So, like I have a blog I ask the artists if I can use the images, and I'll download images, or they'll send me images, and then I'll use them on my blog. My blog is a non-commercial blog, um, and I write articles about them. But you know, that's getting the permission of the person. And occasionally I get images and I don't know if they're copyrighted, and I use them as examples of things. And I try to be careful with that, but it's a non-commercial blog, so and I haven't gotten in trouble yet. And if somebody asked me to remove it, I would remove it.
Yeah, I think it's also like under fair copyright use because you are in a way adding commentary to the artworks.
Okay. Yeah. But if I added commentary that they disagreed with, that would be a problem probably.
Yeah.
I had somebody also use my art um, on one of their blogs, and or I've had that happen several times. People take my images because they work for what they want, and I said, well, I don't mind you using my images. I email them. I said, I'm kind of flattered that you use my images, as a matter of fact, but because I know they're not like making a ton of money off of it. They're just doing it for their own pleasure, or whatever it is that people do blogs for. Some people make money off of them. And I said, but just credit me so that if somebody wants to go to my website, they can see more of my work. And there we get into it right there. The word my, my. I, me, mine. That's a Beatles song. I, me, mine. So, aren't we all like human beings, and don't we share everything in one sense? So we have to be able to get past that. We can say I, but we can all say I.
Yeah. So there was this uh artist, let's say there's this artist, they make their money out of commissioned artworks. So they have their style, their artistic style, and a customer may come to them and give them a prompt and they make the artwork in their style. The problem with the incorporation of AI now is that someone, instead of going to the actual artist and paying them for their work, they could go to the AI program and just type in whatever prompt they want in the artist's work.
Yeah, and design something for their commercial business or whatever, instead of like say, instead of hiring a designer or someone who deals in branding, they just use the AI. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's another side of it. Even when I was like investigating the topic, I went to this AI program and I was like, I don't know what I should put in for the prompt. I put in graphic design magazine cover and it gave me this very detailed artwork and I was like, this is very impressive. You could use it in an actual magazine and I feel like no one would know that it was designed by this AI program. But
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that because AI programs are now able to mimic the style of an artist, people may think of it as to why go to the specific artist when I can just use AI and get the same artwork style.
Well, yeah, and there you probably need some type of protection under the law. I've got to take one break, and I'll be right back. I'll be right back.
No worries.
Sorry.
You're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about what you're asking, and it just comes back to ethics. We have to teach it in our educational practices, both in art, and design, and business. We have not to take the place of spiritual teaching, but a lot of people are moving away from traditional religion, traditional spirituality. Some people even accredit the horrors in the world to religion now. But the original, most of the original religions come out of the idea of compassion. And we have to have some type of ethical teaching in our educational systems. So it comes down to that, in my view. You can disagree with me. I mean, people are going to be Machiavellian, whether we teach that in education systems or not, you know. And like one idea of the greater good, one person's idea of the greater good may be completely different from another person's idea of the greater good. We could talk about some of these billionaire types, are what they're doing really for the greater good, or are they just, massive egos that are perpetuating their worldview? They may have thought ethically about these things, but how developed are they as human beings? Have they only developed their intellect or their business acumen? We have this kind of Machiavellian concepts that penetrate our entire humanity. And by that I mean this idea that the ends justifies the means. So if we get to Mars, but we destroy the environment trying to get to Mars, we put more pollutants into the earth, we kill that which is basically been our womb and mother, that which we've been created in. What does that say about us? And so we have to have ethics at every level. You have to teach that, but there's always going to be people that are going to take advantage of other people. So legally, do you want to use the law every time something goes wrong, to and asserting your rights? At some point, you have to be whole within yourself, despite what happens in the world, despite who takes advantage of you. You have to be whole within yourself, and you have to also be generous. You have to be, treat other people like you want to be treated. Don't take advantage of other people's good nature. Don't take advantage of other people, period, without also benefiting them, and allowing that they may not want you to, giving people the benefit of their own identity, their own, anyway, they're complicated ideas. Everything you've asked me is complicated, and I'm not necessarily the one to answer those questions. I just have my own ideas about. I just try and live my life. The higher you get in an organization, the more responsibility you have, but also the more dangerous it becomes for you, in a way of making a wrong step. If you actually have good intentions, you may actually be led to do things that are devastating for other people. So these AI, these people that you can't have AI without money, because as AI is generated, but though actually these things, I mean, you look at a clock. Clocks have a long history. They go way back. An abacacy. These are machines. They're something that they contain intelligence, and they're externalized aspects of our own intelligence. So really, AI goes way back. It's just that we call it AI now because it seems to reflect our inner consciousness even closer than what we are, and we project into the future when our consciousness will have expanded, and also through AI, our consciousness will have expanded. Memory is a tricky thing, and the computer actually has made our memories better in some ways and worse in others. We rely on it to remember things for us. We can always look something up in a second. I do this, and find out the definition of something, the word. And so we have but in the past, language words evolve slowly over time. They mean one thing, and then later they mean something else. Like the idea of art and craft. Art and craft hold history within them. The idea, the words themselves hold history. We think of craft as one thing and art as another, but in the past they were from different cultures and they meant the same thing basically. So the things that change over time, and our consciousness is actually changed by the fact that we create these external artificial consciousnesses. So we will change and it will change. And ultimately, it will separate from us and be able to be self generating to some extent. There's the same thing. It has to be able to use material. And as the more we learn to manipulate matter, the more it will learn to manipulate matter. So I told my student the other day, a student a while back, I said, there'll be a point at which, forget about people hallucinating and that kind of thing. Because then there's always the question with somebody who's schizophrenic, are the things that they see have some reality external to them? Are they maybe actually real entities, but psychology has said that they're just projections of their own mind? Or if somebody's possessed, what used to be called possession, multiple personalities or whatever, any kind of thing, demonically possessed, is that an actual entity that's within them, or is it something that's a projection of their own inner consciousness? And I got to get back to what I was thinking and going backwards. So
I guess it's I'm not really looking for an answer. It's just about learning about different people's points of views and what their
right,
opinions are.
right.
Mhm.
How many people have you interviewed so far?
It's great. You're definitely giving me a lot of information that I can use. I just have one last question, so I don't take up
Okay.
more time. Sorry, this has taken a while.
Yeah, I talk a lot. My
Um,
students get tired of it sometimes.
okay, so Netflix has used AI for animated movies, and AI artwork won the Colorado Annual Art Competition in 2022.
Uh,
AI generated short film won an award at the Cannes Film Festival this year, I think it was. Do you believe the usage of AI hinders the originality and creativity applied on an artwork, or do you think it can improve it?
uh, well, if it won an award, then somebody thought it was good, right? So, you know, I mean, film itself and video, they're illusionistic to begin with. So, um, how far do you go with that illusion? You're also the effect on consciousness. These are complicated things. I mean, it like goes all the way back to the Greek concept of catharsis. These externalizing our own inner life, which means thoughts and emotions and also will. We externalize them and we view them because it's a theatrical event. We view them, we feel something, we think things afterwards, and a lot of times the real uh, judgment of a work of film or video um, is the after thoughts, the after images. What is it generated in us that we carry with us? Some of that can be good and some of it not necessarily good, or we can just like, that was nothing. We dismiss it. So, and it still originates in human consciousness. That AI that generated that film originated in human consciousness, and for now, it's an interaction. Somebody created it by using AI, right? So it's still an interaction. It's still a creative act. They came up with the questions to feed into there, or the prompts to feed into the AI. So I can't give you a full answer to that. I'm like, in some ways, I'm a real purist, but I'm aware, and I've always compromised a lot of things in my life in order to like survive, per se. In order to survive without the external accoutrements of culture, you have to have land to begin with. But that seems like another issue. But in a way, it's related in the sense that that how much do you want to depend on artificial things? You know, if you some people are like my friend in the department, Romeo De Loreto or Di Loreto. It's Italian. I'm not great at pronouncing other languages. Romeo believes that artists, the young artists that we teach should be really experimental, just do all kinds of stuff, use technology, mix and match medium. And I do a little bit of that, but both of us are traditionalists in our own work. He's gone back to black and white photography, the same kind of camera from the same company that made the camera of Ansel Adams. So he does nature photography, right? It's for photography, that's very traditional. If you can talk about 200 years of tradition, right? Or 300, is it 200? Yeah, 200 years of tradition, because photography came about 200 years ago. So, and in ceramics, it's a much older field. It's thousands of years. I still do some of the same processes that were done way back, but still, that's the foundation for other things, because every single craft or art is built upon, and that AI is building on traditional painting. This is why hand design classes are good for digital design students, because they need to know the origins of things, in order to understand what they're dealing with. Otherwise, they do become puppets of machines, and that, and whatever's behind the machine.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? Because I have this problem of digressing.
No, you did.
The end of a long week, and I'm going on coffee right now.
Yeah, okay. So just lastly, is there anything you want to add about your respective opinion about artificial intelligence in the realm of art and design?
Art and design. Okay. Well,
Any last words?
I mean, if I see it, I'll probably be interested in it for the moment. Judging it externally, if I knew it was AI, it might change the way I think about it. But I usually just look at images for what they are. If they're dealing with human experience, which they still are, if they're dealing with, then I look at them with respects to what human experiences that are being reflected back to me. So, and that has a lot to do with I teach critique. We critique art, we critique each other's art, and critique is kind of a harsh word, but I've come to, I say, soft critique. So we're not bashing or tearing down the work of art, but looking at it for what it is. So that's the same way I would do with the AI generated thing. It's like, although I can't have compassion for the artist as much, I can to some extent, because I'm thinking about, these machines, and to me, they start taking on characteristics of their own, like that thing I said about the chitty chitty bang bang. It's like, are they actually becoming conscious? And it's like, do you extend your empathy towards the machine itself? Like in the movie AI, there's this idea of the perpetuation of empathy. Am I really feeling something from this art? And there it might, maybe it is valid, valid art. But I still would probably prefer to know the artist, to be able to have a relationship with the artist, at some level, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, and know that they're a human being that has thoughts and feelings like my own, and that they can teach me something.
Do you
Does that
think
make sense? But AI can also teach you something. What?
Yeah. Do you think it's because it makes you feel more related to the art, knowing that the artist had a specific intention when making the artwork?
Yeah, I mean, if the computer could tell me why they made this art, like I'll ask you ask the class what they think of the art, and you have your own idea about the art that the student has made, and then you ask the student what they meant by the art. Sometimes it's very different, and then I would want to know if the machine becomes conscious enough, could it answer that question for me? Some students can't answer the question. They don't know why they've done something, and sometimes they are able to communicate their ideas really well through art, and the students get the idea from the art. But that doesn't mean the art's invalid if what the student and the audience, their view of the art is completely different. That doesn't mean the art is invalid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's the same thing. Can I ask that computer what it meant? And or is it just random? Is it just random? If it's random and I'm still getting some feeling from it, then it has to be the original sources that I'm feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or my own experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much
All
for.
right, enjoyed it.
I just wanted to ask you, how can I access your blog? I would like to take a look at it.
In my emails, it should be. No, it's not. I don't know if it's at the bottom or not. I'll take your email and I'll email you from my other email account, and it
Okay.
has all that, the links to some of my stuff on there, my work. The blog I was talking about is called Art and Anthroposophy. This is a movement that was started by Rudolf Steiner, and he grew out of theosophy, which is a sort of a joining of Eastern and Western spirituality,
Mhm.
the original New Age movement. So um, I'm not exactly like your typical New Ager. Anthroposophy is a little different. It's also sometimes called spiritual science, but it's nothing like Scientology. Although probably L. Ron Hubbard stole some ideas from Steiner. I'm not that familiar with Scientology, but but it's a type of spirit. It's a spiritual path as much as anything, but it's also an intellectual. A lot of intellectuals are in an anthroposophists, and it doesn't uh, discount scientific concepts. It actually tries to resolve them at at a higher level. Okay, but I'll send you that link. All
Okay.
right. Bye bye.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your time.